I'm Ben Sawyer, and this is The Road to Now. And road it is. It's July, and as longtime listeners of this show will know, me and Bob both take off. I am in Long Beach, California, where I set up shop here pretty much every July, grinding it out, doing some stand-up, hanging out with the family, just enjoying this great weather out here. Bob is on the road with the Avett brothers. You know, when we started this show years ago, it would be bizarre for me to say, hey, if you like this show but don't know the Avett brothers, because I think most of the core audience early on was Avett brothers fans. But God bless you all. We may be at a point now where you don't know that the Avett brothers are playing at Red Rocks coming up 3 nights, July 11th. That's a Friday. That one's sold out. Saturday, July 12th, and Sunday, July 13th. They got tickets available to those second two. Probably not for long. Go check out the Avett brothers if you haven't. I love them. And, you know, I don't think Bob listens to these intros when he's not on them. I'm saying this honestly. Love those guys. So I hope your summer's going well. Today, we are resharing an episode from 2023 with Major Garrett. Now, you all know Major Garrett from our recent live show, but long before that, and one of the reasons we thought of him was because he did this great podcast series, Agent of Betrayal, about Robert Hanssen, this super spy during the Cold War. And today, we are sharing that original conversation, Major's first appearance on the show. Major Garrett, of course, is the well-known CBS News White House correspondent. But the series itself, man, it's so good. The mind-boggling things like tunneling under embassies, all the cat and mouse games that were played during the Cold War, they're all in the series. Hope you guys enjoy it. Hope your July 4th weekend was great. And I hope the road is treating you all well. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks to the patrons. Take care.
Ben, this is one of the weeks where I'm so grateful my co-host has a PhD in Russian history.
Oh, well, Bob, this is one of those weeks when I'm very happy that I don't know everything about Soviet history, so I could walk into an incredible story about espionage in the 1980s and learn something new about it. Who's our guest today?
Major Garrett, Chief Washington Correspondent for CBS News, creator and host of the Takeout podcast. But today he's here to talk about his latest project, which is a podcast series called Agent of Betrayal, The Double Life of Robert Hanssen. And for many of you, that name, Robert Hanssen, it's in the back of your brain. You've heard it before, but maybe you're not sure where you've heard it. Major, welcome to The Road to Now.
It's so great to be with you. Thanks so much for the interest and bringing some attention to this project, a passion project of mine, sort of on the sideline of my other CBS work for 2 years.
Yes, for 2 years. This is what I love about this. People love the true crime stuff. But, to have the time and to be able to invest the rigor in like actually doing the research, sometimes that gets lost, With you're not only telling a story, you have dug up facts, you've dug up interviews with people that were not on the record before. So this isn't just retelling a story. This is taking a fascinating story already and adding to it. And really, from the perspective of a historian, you've brought sources to the fore that we didn't have before. So this guy Robert Hanssen served as an agent for the Soviet Union inside the FBI from 1979 till 2001. You say that he's one of the most damaging spies that's ever existed. Could you just give us a highlight reel of the damage this guy caused?
Sure. So Robert Hanssen was a spy in 3 different portions of his FBI career. It wasn't continuous. It wasn't a straight line. He moved in and out. One pause was caused by the collapse of the Soviet Union. He didn't know what was going to go on, so he went dark for a while. But he started in 1979. And here's what we know. Here's what's absolutely confirmed. Robert Hanssen, in his earliest days and the terminology is agent in place, meaning the Soviets knew they had someone, he was in place, and he was a valuable resource. That's the terminology the intelligence community uses, agent in place. He turned over information that confirmed information from another notorious spy, Aldrich Ames, that led directly to the execution of 3 coveted and recruited assets for our government, meaning Soviets who had converted to our side and were telling us valuable secrets about what was going on within the Soviet Union and the Soviet government. So 3 people who, through hard work and determination of the U.S. government, were recruited to assist us, were executed. because of information Robert Hanssen handed over. At least 3 people. There is evidence to suggest that number of people either imprisoned or likely executed could be as high as 10. So that's the human damage. Human damage alone, irreparable, can never be changed. The estimates of U.S. intelligence programs blown up, not compromised, completely ruined by information Robert Hanssen handed first to the Soviets, then to the Russians, calculates, according to 2 separate subsequent reports, one by the Justice Department and one by a special commission led by former FBI Director William Webster to look into the Robert Hanssen matter, calculates the damage of blown intelligence programs, technological and human, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Some have said it exceeds $1 billion. It's hard to calculate all that, but in terms of things that we were working on, things that we had invested tremendous amounts of money in to learn more about our rivals in the Cold War, the Soviet Union, post-Cold War, the Russian Federation, at least hundreds of millions of dollars just evaporated, blown out because of information that Robert Hanssen handed over. That's why within the history of the FBI, he is the most damaging spy in the history of the FBI and one of the most damaging in the history of our government.
Major, I just got to ask you, you began this during the pandemic lockdown, right? We all had our projects. Some of them already look dated. Like, if speaking from myself personally, but this is something that you begin there. It's a 2-year journey for you and your team. What made you think of this story? Like, what there's always that moment of discovery and that moment of, man, this is awesome. I got to dig into this. What was that moment for you?
So, very brief story about how I got to the idea of trying an episodic serialized story. So I'm a daily journalist. I've written 5 books, but my career is defined by my daily journalism, always has been. I started in newspapers, then for a short period of time I worked in magazines, U.S. News and World Report, then I went into television. So most of my career is defined by daily journalism. And so the idea of writing a big story for a podcast platform in a serialized way was a brand new idea for me. And I had this kicking around in my head for a long time. But the pandemic obviously created a lot of opportunities for other projects because day-to-day television for the chief Washington correspondent was overtaken by what was clearly a medical field story, stories about things happening outside of Washington. So early on in the pandemic, I created a daily podcast built entirely around the White House coronavirus task force briefings, and radio stations around the country took that creation of mine. Then I went to weekly documentary podcasts about subjects related to and flowing through politics or the pandemic. And I did that for 40 weeks. And one of those podcasts won a national award, beat out podcasts from NPR and the BBC. So I had some success there. And then my team and I said, well, what about a big story that we could tell in an episodic way? We came up with about 8 different ideas. The final 2 that we considered were Robert Hanssen, or Anthrax after 9/11. Both very compelling stories with lots of twists and turns, tremendous amount of anxiety around both. Ultimately, we decided Robert Hanssen because Robert Hanssen is a person, Anthrax is a thing. And we thought, what do people want to hear about? They want to hear about a person. They want to understand something about a human being as opposed to a substance. So we decided on Robert Hanssen. And then we set a goal for ourselves. And I will take credit for setting this goal because this is a well-known story in the intelligence community. Lots of people have chewed over this, who know the CIA, who know the FBI. Several books have been written about it. But my goal was to tell this story in a way that insiders would still learn a lot and people who knew almost nothing about this story would be enthralled. To basically tell this story in such a way that people who thought they knew this story backward and forward would still say to themselves, wow, I didn't know that. And people who just barely maybe had some, as you said, Bob, some dim recollection of the name Robert Hanssen would be sucked in and could not leave because it was such an interesting story. That's the goal I set for myself and my team. I think we did it.
I'm going to say check and check.
Thank you.
Literally, this podcast started off with Bob being like, I'm so glad that you're a Soviet historian and know this stuff. And I'm like, I'm excited I learned some new things, Bob. And Bob likes it and I like it. It's great. So you have this guy and, right now a new episode's coming out every week. There's a couple episodes out. We were fortunate enough to get to listen to a couple ahead, but we didn't listen to all of them, which means that you're not only listening to people who are interviewing Major right now, you're listening to people who can't wait for the new episodes to come out.
Thank you.
And in this story, you start off with a guy who is, not particularly remarkable. If anything's remarkable about him, it's like how he seems to be unable to let loose. Like the guy wears, he wears a suit to like the labs at college, right? His dad's mean to him and stuff like that. Like, could you kind of go back to this guy's origins and tell that story a little bit so that the guy you just said tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, people died over him. Go back to how this guy looks when he shows up in the world.
Right. So what's one of the great hooks of any kind of story? Someone who looks like one thing, but is another. And that other thing they are is not only so diametrically opposed to the thing they look like, but there is something deadly and cold-blooded about that. That's a hook of a story. Well, Robert Hanssen is a very giant hook, if you like that kind of story. So while he's with the FBI, wherever he lives, whether it's suburban New York or suburban Washington, he's as plain as can be. He's as plain and ordinary and suburban as you could imagine. Very predictable habits, goes to Catholic Mass every day, looks all the world externally like a garden variety American suburbanite. That's not what he is, quite obviously. His upbringing is actually very traditional in post-war America. He grows up in a neighborhood outside of O'Hare International Airport. The only Republican ward, we were told, of Chicago ward politics at the time. Most of the people who lived in that neighborhood were firefighters and cops. His dad was a lieutenant, Chicago Police Department, somewhat well known in the neighborhood. And yeah, his dad was, as dads were of that era, post-World War II, emotionally unavailable and harsh and hypercritical of his son. Is that a reason to become one of the most notorious and damaging and deadly spies in American history? No, but it's not irrelevant. And there's a bit of resentment that builds from that relationship. Bob Hanssen is not social. He's not athletic. He's kind of nerdy. And he is identified as such in high school and is kind of an outsider. But as is made very clear in episode 1, he has an insatiable desire to be around girls and to chase girls in a, again, 1950s, early 60s kind of motif. I don't mean in a menacing way. I just mean he liked to hang around girls and wanted their attention. And that's who this Bob Hanssen becomes. And meanwhile, in that 50s, 60s period of time, what is one of the pop culture icons presented to both British and American moviegoers? James Bond. Hanssen develops kind of a fascination with James Bond, sort of tries to secretly fashion himself as maybe a potential James Bond-like figure. That begins to flow through his life in the FBI. So these are the seeds of kind of, if not motivations, orientations of Bob Hanssen toward the espionage world. And then there's some crucial factors eventually that lead him to betray our country. But that's sort of the origin story. That's who he looks like. That's how he came to be. And there is, and we talked to people who were roommates of his in college, who were friends of his in high school, nothing that they can trace, nothing at all about their experiences with Bob Hanssen then that would have led them to believe he became what he ultimately became.
You talk about the individuals that you interviewed, and there were a lot of them. And one of the things that really pulled me into this series was I call it the 360 view you give us of Robert Hanssen. And that's only obtainable by hours and hours and hours of talking to people. Well, how did you talk to all these people? And who didn't want to talk to you? And one more question, who was the person that you couldn't get until you got him?
Great sequence of questions. I'll start with the last one first. If I can remember all three, I'm going to do my level best. So there were some FBI officials who were reluctant to talk about some of the nitty-gritty parts of this investigation in the case, either because it was too sensitive for them or they hadn't done it before. And we had to wait for a couple of them. In certain instances, some of them retired, and that gave them a little bit more flexibility. Robert Hanssen's death earlier this summer gave people some larger flexibility and more willingness. The other great truth about news gathering in the podcast platform as compared to television, especially with a matter like this and its sensitivity, lots of people don't want to be on camera, but they'll be at a microphone where they aren't seen. Their face isn't revealed. The comparative anonymity of a podcast as opposed to being on a television camera and recorded for all time before a television camera was a great separator. People were willing to talk to us who'd never talked before about this topic because it was a podcast and not a television show. Many of our early initial emails had a very familiar sequence. Is this on camera? Because if it is, I'm not doing it. No, it's not. Oh, well, I might be willing to do that. And we talked to more than 50 people. And when you talk about the hours of tape, we have more than 80 hours of tape, more than 80 hours of interviews. Some with dear friends of Robert Hanssen's who do regard him as a criminal, as a traitor, but they still admired him for the better parts of the personality that they came to know. And we thought it was very important in the series of telling the story that we didn't portray him as a 24/7 monster that nobody could relate to or understand or befriend, because that's not true. There were people within Bob Hanssen's life who considered him a dear friend, and that's one of the things we wanted to get across, because when those people who thought they were dear friends of Hanssen, who thought they knew him, came to discover he was something completely different, their lives weren't ruined, but they were materially changed. We have people who told us they cannot get the level of betrayal, the level of personal betrayal and heartache out of their system. One of our interview subjects says Robert Hanssen lives continuously rent-free in his mind. And he has nightmares about Robert Hanssen. He has nightmares about his physical reaction to discovering this person he thought he knew wasn't that person. That's a part of the story we thought, quite in addition to all the cloak and dagger stuff and the espionage, which is really cool. Trust me, it's really, really cool. That human side of the story was something we thought would not only resonate, but land with people who just care about human relations, maybe more than they care about espionage or cloak and dagger stuff.
When you make people villains or you make them heroes, you separate their humanity from the situation. And you can't learn from a superhero because you can't be one. You can only learn from people.
Yeah.
And so when you make someone human, that's where the learning happens. That's brilliant.
Well, I got to follow up then here, because you mentioned Hanssen recently passed away while you were making this, right? So that changed something in the story for you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much of this was written and then rewritten after his passing?
So 90% of it was written. One of the reasons this is not a bingeable podcast series is because we're not done yet. And Hanssen's death in Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado changed fundamentally the final episode, the 8th episode. And it changed it in very important ways, not just that it created a genuine holistic termination point of the Hanssen story, his death, but our ongoing freedom of information requests and lawsuits, because for those who don't know, when you file a freedom of information request, the government can process it and wait a very long time to process it. But if you sue the government, you can speed up the process of them responding to your request. Well, Hanssen's death dramatically sped up our access to documents we'd long been seeking. So we're reporting out this podcast in real time. The 8th episode will have a lot of brand new reporting that we are getting in week by week, and starting last week, as a matter of fact, when we got our first tranche of documents from the Federal Bureau of Prisons about Hanssen's time in Supermax, his psychological evaluations, his health reports, everything. So that episode is changing before our very eyes. That's why it's not already in bingeable format, because it's not done yet.
As the reporter and journalist you've been for so much of your life, it seems like the two things have come together, like the idea of doing that story that only can be done over time, and then the thing that you're reporting on every day. It seems like the two worlds have met for you.
They have, but I want to make sure people understand that I've been on a very important learning curve with this particular endeavor, because as a daily journalist, my instinct runs in one very clear direction. Tell people everything I've learned immediately, right off the top. And we have a production partner with this series, Neon Hum. And our editors and co-writers and co-producers have been instrumental in helping me understand that in storytelling, if you do that, shove everything that you've got right to the front, well, things get a little ragged after 20 minutes because you've told all the great stuff. You've sort of blurted everything out. And what you have to do in a story, and they've counseled me on this, Major, you got to hold some things back. You've got to help people move through the information, move through the arc of the story so they can appreciate it and absorb it in a better and more memorable way. And they've been instrumental in helping me find that way. It's been a collaborative process. We wouldn't be where we are. It wouldn't sound as good as it does. It wouldn't read as well as it does without their partnership. And I want to make sure that they get credit they deserve because I couldn't have done it without them.
So far, because you really are, you're veering into a variety of different source types, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I love. It's this nexus of, your skill set as a journalist, like bringing in historical sources, forcing the government to reveal some sources that weren't otherwise there, which is always fun. What do you think has surprised you most while you're doing this? Because, a lot of the story, the sensational stuff was out there, but now that you're getting into this wider source set and having more time to think about it, like what's something, and you don't have to reveal the end of it, because obviously this answer could be different in a month. But, when you're starting this project, what's the thing that like you found this thing out and it convinces you, you're like, this is going great?
So again, I don't want to give things away, but there are early moments in Robert Hanssen's arrival at Supermax in Florence, Colorado. And Supermax is the most secure prison in America. The inmates there are among the most notorious, deadly inmates in all of the world. And there's a debate that we explore in the course of our podcast of whether or not Robert Hanssen really even needed to be in a place as secure and as difficult and as confining as Supermax. His conditions of confinement there were 23 hours a day of solitary confinement, 1 hour of recreation, I put that word in quotation marks, which constituted walking in a cage by himself. Those are very harsh terms of confinement. And we explore whether or not that was justified. Clearly, he was guilty. Clearly, he pled guilty. He could have been executed. For a time, the then Attorney General John Ashcroft suggested he should have been executed, but he wasn't. And the plea deal, we explore why the government went to that length of the plea deal, what it got and extracted from Robert Hanssen in exchange for letting him live. So there are dimensions of that that are brand new, that have never been reported, that I'm very proud of. There are also voices adjacent to this story who have sometimes been given stereotypical short shrift. If you know anything about the Robert Hanssen story or you Google it, you'll find a reference to a stripper. Well, that is already a term that is derogatory or stereotypically negative. A stripper. She has a name. Her name is Priscilla Sue Gailey. She's a dancer. She danced in many cities in America and Washington, D.C. And for a time, Robert Hanssen befriended her for about a year. We talked to Priscilla Sue Gailey at length. She's given a couple of interviews, but she's never been recorded on tape since Hanssen's arrest when she appeared with Barbara Walters and I think Larry King. But it's been a very, very long time. And the interviews then don't have what my interviews with her now do, which is her recollection and her reprocessing of this platonic relationship. And I want to emphasize platonic relationship with Robert Hanssen. They never had sex. They never kissed. They never did anything. And yet Robert Hanssen showered her with gifts upon gifts upon gifts, made her feel for the first time and only time in her life like a princess, like someone who was valued in the world.
Well, Major, you let her tell her story.
I do.
You did not ask her questions about Robert Hanssen. You asked her about her story and she told it, and it's such a good interview.
It's so heartbreaking because what she's come to the conclusion of is that Robert Hanssen was using her, that Robert Hanssen was preparing her to be a guinea pig for something he was going to do next in the world of espionage. The slaughter girl, in her phrase. I was going to be Robert Hanssen's slaughter girl because I would have done anything for him. I liked him so much. I was so amazed that he was so generous and kind to me. And she's a real person. And her real voice comes through. And that's not a sensational revelation. but it's a component of this story that, as I said before, had been given stereotypical short shrift. And I was determined to not do that, to let her humanity, her sense of heartache, her sense of disbelief be part of the public record. And you've had a chance to listen to that episode. It's not out yet, but I believe it's some of our most powerful work.
Yeah, that interview, and I listened to it today, and I couldn't help but think, what a sweet human being. What a just a gentle. I thought nothing negative about her. She just was very endearing and seemed very sincere.
Yeah.
And yeah, she was a victim, absolutely a victim.
And I think you can hear a couple of times the catch in my throat.
Yeah, yeah.
I felt deeply sad for her.
And it was her son who convinces her to speak with you.
Well, he becomes a conduit because, as we make very clear, Priscilla Sugalius had a very tough life. Had a tough life before Robert Hanssen entered it and made her feel like a princess for about a year and a half or so, and a very tough life after that. Some of that is because of bad choices she's made, unquestionably. She doesn't have a fixed address all the time. She's harder to contact. And we had contacted her originally. My producer, Sarah Cook, had found her. They had a couple of email exchanges, and then for months she just disappeared. We didn't know where she went. So we had to find her son, who was able to get her back in touch with us. And then we were able to, for the very first time, about, a year ago, have this very first interview. We had several more after that. But it was a bit of a go, as the Brits would say, to find her and to keep her in contact with us so we could help tell her story. And I wanted to tell that story very much.
You know, part of our mission here on the Road to Now is to put the individual's narrative in the context of the historical narrative. And what's the thing that I couldn't stop thinking about from the first episode was Hanssen begins his spy career in like 80, 81. And that is the beginning of the Ronald Reagan era. Maybe no other president so defined himself about the Cold War, right? He defines himself fighting the evil empire. He is restoring American bravado, and he is going to take on the evil empire and win the battle once and for all, which many argue he did. He does, right? And so Hanssen wants to be this James Bond type figure, but he goes in the opposite direction. Talk about that a little bit. Talk about where we were as a country the moment he is beginning this life of crime.
Right. So he initially begins in 1979, but he does a lot of his dirtiest work in 80 and 81. But he's a walk-in. That's another terminology I learned in the intelligence community. Some people are recruited by foreign intelligence services to become traitors against their nation. It's a long-running process, lots of twists and turns. Oftentimes it doesn't work, but there's a lot of effort. We do it. The Soviets did it. Now the Russians do it. Hostile foreign powers do this. You try to recruit people on the inside for them to be for you. That wasn't Hanssen. Hanssen, as an FBI agent in New York, gets to understand the operations of a Soviet company based in New York called Amtorg, a trading corporation. Well, that covers a lot of ground, doesn't it? A trading corporation. And he walks in, broad daylight, walks in and offers his services. They don't know what to make of it initially, but over time, Hanssen proves himself to be valuable. And at the very moment, as you said, Bob, when the rhetoric and the orientation of the federal government under Ronald Reagan is not just, well, we're going to compete with the Soviet Union. No, we're going to defeat the Soviet Union on every level, and we're going to treat them fundamentally differently. We're not going to treat them like we have normal, casual diplomatic relations. Things are going to be tough in every direction all the time. And within the FBI, there was a dramatic increase in efforts to surveil, counter, and defeat all intelligence operations within the United States sponsored by the Soviet Union. This became an imperative within the FBI. So this is the culture, both rhetorically for the nation, internally with the FBI, that Robert Hanssen is living in. And it's at that very moment he becomes malicious against our government and for the Soviets. And it's that contrast. Oh, there's one other part of this story. When Robert Hanssen is at lunch and walking down the corridors of the FBI, talking to his colleagues, all the time he's spouting aggressive, anti-communist, Reagan-like rhetoric. So for all the outside world, he looks like an upright, stalwart FBI special agent who hates the commies. Absolutely hates the commies, the godless communists. Meanwhile, he's handed them stuff left and right. That is the story.
He goes to church every day. He goes to church like every day, and he's a member of like a very conservative sect within the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Bob, do you know about this? Is this?
Yes, I do know about this, but this was one of my questions, Ben, and I'm so excited that you're kind of like stumbling around it and kind of asking it.
Take it, Bob. Take it.
No, Opus Dei. I mean, this is like even today, these are super conservative Catholics, fundamentalists. Is that right? Would you characterize it that way, Major?
So I'm not sure if fundamentalist applies, but it is a strict form of Catholicism that has a kind of fundamentalist orientation to it, in the sense that you try to practice your faith on a daily basis. You evangelize. So there's a fundamentalist component there. There are aspects of Opus Dei. Not everyone who's in Opus Dei does this, but there are ways in which you inflict physical pain on a regular basis to remind yourself of the sacrificial relationship you have to God and dogma. So that pain is to remind you that sacrifice in the here and now and physical pain in the here and now is a reminder of the adversity that you should feel in your relationship to humanity and to God. There are some people who find great value in Opus Dei, and I don't want to suggest that there are those who don't. But for Robert Hanssen, this was a reflection, an illustration of his seriousness about Catholicism. It was an outward projection. Hey, I'm not just a Catholic, I'm an Opus Dei Catholic. And this is true in the Washington, D.C. area. Opus Dei is also a pathway to people of influence in the federal government. Catholics who are powerful, not all, but many, exist within the Opus Dei world. It is not the only, but it is a not insignificant pathway to power. And there is some evidence to suggest that was one of Hanssen's motivations. But he was this outwardly very pious person. And not everyone who's a member of Opus Dei attends Mass every day, but Hanssen did. And he had a crucifix in his office. He frequently asked people about their religious perspectives, their religious beliefs, how serious they were about religion and philosophy and God and the like. So he was, in his own way, a Catholic evangelist. So there are parts of it that are fundamentalist in nature. I just don't know, because I'm not expert enough to apply fundamentalism to Opus Dei and Catholicism, but I would say those were component parts.
Bob Dylan has a song it's recent for him. I Contain Multitudes. And I've thought about that so many times, thinking about Robert Hanssen. I mean, the guy was a walking contradiction. You know, so many component parts.
So we all carry around the luggage of our lives. There's a movie I quite fancy. I quite like, Joe versus the Volcano. It's not a particularly well-known movie, but it's a very Jungian movie. Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. And the plot contains Tom Hanks going on a journey, and he needs to bring his luggage with him. We all bring our luggage with ourselves. And near the end of the movie, what saves Tom Hanks is he has to float on his luggage. It's very metaphorical. So everyone carries their luggage with them. And luggage is a metaphor for compartments where we store things. Well, the psychologist who debriefed Robert Hanssen after he pled guilty told us in great detail that Robert Hanssen was the most compartmented individual psychologically he had ever encountered. And this particular psychiatrist has a unique specialty. He's a psychiatrist for spies who plead guilty. This is one of his areas of expertise. So he's dealt with a lot of people who have become betrayers of our country, spies who have turned over. And he said, within that rank, which is a specialized rank of people who betray and offer one thing in the public view and become something else or are something else, even in that realm, Robert Hanssen was the most compartmented, hard to pick apart, hard to get inside of individual he had ever encountered. And that's another dimension of this story that, as I said before, really put a hook in me.
When you look at this guy and you hear about everything he's done, I think like the the first reaction is, man, this guy must have been like a James Bond. Like they're sending this guy out into the field. This guy is doing crazy things. And then you find out that the reason he knows all of this stuff is a lot like Bob. The other night at our live show, Carol Culp was there. Carol and Yolanda, right? They run they're accountants. They're amazing accountants for the Road to Now, and they were talking about going to concerts for bands. And they said, I can't remember exactly what they said. They said something like, we always know exactly when to show up to see the band, because even though we're not there for the planning, we know everything that's going to happen that night and what time, because we see the money trail coming through our office, and we probably know the show better than the artists do. And this gets back at the point. So, Major, could you reveal now what's obvious? What was this guy's job in the FBI?
So he wasn't a field agent. That was one of the points of friction. He wasn't a James Bond like, come into the office, get your mission, go out and get the bad guy, go out and get the spy, go out and do this thing. No, he was a desk jockey. He was a paper pusher. He read analytical reports at his desk, and he became a budget specialist.
Ding, ding, ding.
Budget specialist. So he saw all of the FBI internal budget documents about everything. It gave him access. Because of his position within the budget unit, he had given access to everything. That gave him ways to look into things he would have, under any other set of circumstances, never had the ability to peer into. That was early in his career. That's how he could, A, get intelligence, B, find ways to get documents. Later in his career, he was sent to the State Department to be the FBI liaison to what's called the Bureau of Missions. Basically looking at all the diplomatic things happening across the United States, meaning from his computer, he could see every cable and everything written about any diplomatic movement for any country intersecting with the United States. Not a bad perch. Place where he could literally look at everything all the time and pull whatever he needed in order to advance his espionage work. And there is something banal about some of the things that Robert Hanssen did. There would be days when he would stand at the copier in FBI offices or headquarters, just stand at the copier and copy secret documents and put them in his briefcase. Just stand at the copier. Oh, it's just Bob at the copier, whatever. And then walk out with them. And somebody told us during this period of time, 80s, 90s, your public library, wherever you lived, had tighter security about books and papers leaving a public library than the FBI did. Meaning, if you walked out of a library with a book you didn't check out, something would go off. Nothing ever went off at the FBI. No one checked anything. So he'd stand at the copier, copy stuff, put it in his briefcase, walk out the door.
Well, I love that the government learned so much from the Pentagon Papers, right? They were like, we should probably just keep not looking at what's coming out of the federal offices.
I actually spoke to a friend recently who I knew was in the military. I didn't know until I told him about this podcast that he was trained in he was in PSYOPs. And one of what they used Robert Hanssen's story to train them to recognize a mole.
Right. Because this is one of the amazing things about this, and we get into it in later episodes. So there were times when the mole hunt was going on collaboratively. The FBI and the CIA, breaking all previous patterns, were working together to try to find a mole within the U.S. intelligence community. Typically, those agencies are hostile to one another. And there were even times in the mole hunt where they got hostile with one another. But they were trying to sort it out and trying to work on it. And they would be discussing the pursuit of the mole within the U.S. intelligence community. And Hanssen would be at that conference table, surrounded by the best spy catchers in our government, the best people in counterintelligence, detecting those who had a false front. And he's sitting there. When Aldrich Ames was caught and convicted, there was a damage assessment done by the U.S. government. One of the leaders of that damage assessment was Robert Hanssen. If you had offered that as a script flourish in a writer's room in Hollywood, they'd be like, no, take that out. Come on. That's too much. That's too much. We can't do that one. I like all the other stuff, but that's a bridge too far. Don't put that in there. No one will believe that.
Yeah, you put that in there and nobody believes these guys are any good at catching anybody. I mean, it's right there. Yeah. Come on. Make him an adjacent office.
Something that sticks out to me is the lighter with the camera.
Yeah.
The cigarette lighter. And they find it and they're like, where'd this come from? You're like, And you have to listen to this podcast to find that moment.
And there's one component part of the story that I want to make sure we hit upon, which is there's a great Alfred Hitchcock movie starring Henry Fonda called The Wrong Man. And there's a wrong man story in the Robert Hanssen story. And a couple of really brilliant books have been written about the Robert Hanssen case. And the wrong man component gets very short notice. It's not in any of the real popular digestion of the Robert Hanssen story, but there was a guy who worked at the CIA named Brian Kelly, who was very adept at some of the hardest counterintelligence work that there is, detecting illegals. If you know anything about the show of The Americans, that's what that's about, illegals. People who come to the United States for a foreign government, in this case the Soviets, pose as ordinary Americans, hardly ever do anything. They're completely embedded in our culture, look completely normal, but occasionally are activated and do something on behalf of their country. In the case of the Americans, it was the Soviets. Detecting illegals is a huge component part of counterintelligence, and Brian Kelly was among the very best at it in our entire government. Because Brian Kelly was really good and had his career intersect with lots of spy capers, when the mole hunt was at its most intense, he became a leading suspect for legitimate reasons, because he had proximity to a lot of things that were important and some that had been compromised. So he was an initial suspect. Over time, he became the leading suspect. And the treatment of Brian Kelly was enormously harsh, very harsh. He was put on administrative leave. He was under relentless surveillance. His family was questioned very aggressively by the FBI, very aggressively. And we go into this in great detail. And his 3 surviving children, Brian Kelly died of heart failure. And those who love him most and are survivors of him, family and his second wife, believe he died prematurely because of the stress and grief caused by this wrong man part of the story. They've never spoken about this publicly before. All of them are part of a future episode. And I wanted to devote one full episode to this part of the story, because though that investigation began legitimately, and we don't question that at all, carried the component of obsession after a while, and a kind of self-reinforcing mania that it had to be Brian Kelly. It just had to be. It couldn't be anybody else. It had to be this person. And it wasn't that person. And we wanted to make sure that story was part of the record as well.
Yeah, a little bit of the reading that I did surrounding the story, it was almost like they tried to catch him and confirm that he was a spy, and he didn't fall for any of the tricks, and that just made them more convinced that he was that good, that he didn't fall for them. It's horrific.
It's a classic case of confirmation bias, that things that he did, for example, there was what is, again, this is terminology in the intelligence community, a false flag operation. Someone comes to Brian Kelly's house, knocks on his door and says, "We have a means by which you can leave the country. If you will follow my instructions, you can leave the country." Right? Like, what? Really, first of all, you have a terrible Russian accent. I'm not falling for this. And I'm going to report this to my supervisor when I go to work the next day. Textbook what he should have done. That was a U.S. government false flag operation to trick Brian Kelly into acting like the spy they believed he was. He doesn't act like the spy they believed he was. And what does that tell them? He's so smart. He's so perfect. He must be the spy. Wait, what? Yeah, that's how it went down. And that's what can happen in a circumstance when a law enforcement mentality sort of, and people use this terminology, crosses over the available evidence. And that's what happened to Brian Kelly.
I lived in Russia for 2 years, and the better my Russian got, the more people accused me of being a spy. And I remember one time I said to these guys who were like, "You're a spy." I was a graduate student. I was on a Fulbright grant. Fulbright grant pays well if you're not in one of the world's most expensive cities, and I was wearing old clothes, and the guy said, "We know you're a spy. You didn't speak Russian this good if you weren't a spy." And I said, "Look at my clothes. If I was a spy, wouldn't I be wearing better clothes?" And the guy goes, "That sounds like something a spy would say."
Exactly.
I was like, it does sound like something a spy would say. You're right.
Right. Yeah, it's Kafka. It's the trial. Nothing makes sense. Everything around you convicts you.
But Ben was accused by Putin of of being a spy, right?
Well, not directly, just me.
But the Fulbright scholars.
Yeah, the so-called foreign scholars that were here, that were sent here by Hillary Clinton to stir up the discontent. It turns out everybody wants Putin to be president forever. And if like 20% of the people don't, then it must be foreigners who were sent there supposedly working in the archives where I was every day. Right. Anyway.
I feel for you, bro.
I sat at home, by the way. Every demonstration, I sat in my apartment with Dinosaur Jr. playing a video game on my computer where my Russian landlord could see me to make clear that this is not my revolution. I'm just killing robots on the internet. That's all I'm doing.
Love that.
So Berlin Wall falls, 1989. Robert Hanssen still at it for over a decade.
Yeah.
What changes for him? And we don't want to be spoilers, but I wanted to ask this question.
No, but it's I'm comfortable saying this. I'm comfortable saying he goes dark to protect himself for a couple of reasons. One, he doesn't know what's next. He doesn't know what is of value. He doesn't know what its worth is, how much wherewithal financially the new successor to the Soviet Union will have to pay for things he has, what they want most. So he lays low. He goes dark. The other reason he does that is because he has a reasonable suspicion that the KGB, which was then turned into the SVR, the successor agency of the KGB might be smaller. And if people left the KGB, they might take things with them, like information about valuable agents in place who live in America. So he didn't want to do anything on an active level for a while until he could assess his own sense of security and his own communications patterns with the new people who he would be dealing with. So he lays low for several years. And I want to make sure people understand he wasn't a continuous spy for the 22 years he was in the FBI. He was at that level strategic about how he went about it, when he went about it, and most importantly, that they never knew who he was. Yes, he walked in, but after that walk-in in 1979, he then constructs a way in which he communicates with them. He uses aliases, he writes them letters, never meets anyone in person, insists upon that, and never lets them know exactly who he is. That was also something he did to protect himself, thinking that would give him more security over time. Turns out he was mostly right about that. But the big teaser, there's a way in which that all falls apart, and we explain that in vivid, unforgettable detail in future episodes.
Yeah, you guys got to listen to this series. I want to listen to it now. It almost feels unfair. I feel like, you know what? I'm giving an exam tomorrow, and all my students are trying to do is coax out of me what exactly is on the exam, because they're like, but you're the only one who knows. Right. And I feel that way about you right now, Major. I'm like, come on, tell us what happened.
Hey, so tell us about the phone call. You have a recording. Talk about primary sources. Ben and I love primary sources. This is like the mother of all primary documents here. It's this recording of this payphone call. How'd you get your hands on that?
So Robert Hanssen early on has to go through the procedures by which he and the Soviets can understand this elaborate code he has created. It's a mathematical code based on dates, and subtract a certain number from the date, subtract a certain number from the hour, that you will know the time and date that's not being communicated either verbally or on paper. You can translate it properly. And there's one phone call that was recorded by the Soviets of an interaction by his handler, the Soviet handler, and Hanssen. And one of the things I'm proud of is our podcast, and this is the first time it's ever been heard in total from beginning to end, is in this phone call. The handler, last name is Fefilov, does most of the talking to make sure that he understands this hour and date and location sequence properly. And they keep going over it. And you hear initially almost all Fefilov talking, but then Robert Hanssen starts to say, yes, and yes, I can check, and mm-hmm. And then near the end, he starts speaking in a couple of 3 sentences. That recording is not only important in the Soviet files kept on this very important agent in place, name unknown, but highly valuable. That tape recording lives another life, not of value to the Soviets, but of value to the U.S. government. That's next on Agent of Betrayal.
Oh, man.
Major, nobody's even listening right now. They've already turned off this episode and they're listening to your podcast.
Well, we are so thankful that you took the time. We know you're busy. Major is the chief Washington correspondent for CBS News, but do you know sometimes you see him as a correspondent, then he's actually hosting the CBS Nightly News, and then on Sunday you turn on your TV and he's hosting Face the Nation, and then he's got the Takeout podcast, which is excellent, and now he has Agent of Betrayal, the double life of Robert Hanssen. Major Garrett, thank you so much for joining us today. Please come back.
Anytime you ask, I will be back. Anytime at all. What a great hang this has been. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then just to cap it all off, and then after all that, on Thursday, there he is recording The Road to Now.
That's
wow.
Right. He's everywhere. Best of luck with the series. We're going to be telling everybody about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Major. Thank you for listening to The Road to Now. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell the world by giving us 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts or 5 stars on Spotify. Or spread the word directly. Just text a friend maybe, or share a link on social media. Anything helps and we appreciate it. And if you've got a friend who hasn't gotten into podcasts yet, let them know they can hear us every weekend on SiriusXM's POTUS Channel 124. Now is the time when we say our special thanks to our supporters on Patreon and give a shout out to our Washingtonians. That list is Tanya Marsh, Mary Hawking, Tim and Caitlin Wells, Fig White, Matt Williams, Team Martin, Ann Williams and Frank Edwards, Nate Farrer, Jennifer and Magnolia, Chris and Teresa Adams, Joy Avery, Edward Carlson, and Aaron and Derek Garrison. Thanks to all you guys for supporting us. If you want to support our work and maybe get on that list, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/theroadtonow. You'll get extended versions of select conversations, extra episodes, bonus materials, and more. That's all available at patreon.com/theroadtonow. For more on the show, visit our website, theroadtonow.com, where you can easily search our back catalog and quickly find links to content. Why is it so good? 7 Ages Design. That's who made it. If you're looking for a website, go check them out. The Road to Now is hosted and produced by Bob Crawford and me, Ben Sawyer. Our associate producer is Gary Fletcher. This episode was edited by Ben Sawyer, and our theme music, like pretty much always, was by Paul DeFiglia. For Bob Crawford, this is Ben Sawyer. Thank you for listening. Take care.